I think the moment I knew something was wrong was when she stopped asking me how my day went. Not because she was tired, but because she genuinely didn't seem curious anymore. I didn't see it then. I only understood it much later, sitting alone in the apartment we used to share, replaying conversations, and finally hearing what was actually being said underneath them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Ashley got promoted in the fall, about 2 years into our marriage, and I want to be honest here. I was proud of her. Genuinely. She walked in that evening with this particular energy, bright and slightly distant at the same time, like she was already partly somewhere else, and told me over dinner that she'd been made senior director. Significant title, significant salary, new team, travel. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand and said, "That's incredible, seriously." And I meant every word of it. We opened a bottle of something decent and stayed up late talking, and that night felt like us at our best. Easy, warm, connected. I had no idea it was one of the last nights that would feel that way. The changes came slowly enough that I kept finding reasons for them. She was coming home later because the new role demanded it, obviously. She was distracted in the evenings because she was carrying more weight at work, understandable. She started speaking in a different register, a kind of professional shorthand full of terms I didn't recognize, and when I asked what something meant, she'd explain it quickly, efficiently, in a way that felt more like clearing an obstacle than actually talking to me. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I told myself this was just what a big career change looked like up close, that I needed to give her room. And maybe that was even true, for a while. What I didn't expect was the specific way I started to feel self-conscious in my own home. It happened gradually, like a slow pressure you don't notice until it's hard to breathe. She came back from a work dinner once and mentioned offhand that a colleague had asked what her husband did. And when she said I taught at a community college, there was this half-second pause before she moved on. It was probably nothing. I told myself it was nothing, but I filed it away without meaning to. Then a few weeks later, we were getting ready for a dinner with some of her new colleagues. Her first time hosting that crowd, and she came into the bedroom while I was getting dressed, looked at me for a moment, and said, "Maybe not that jacket." I laughed, changed the jacket, didn't think about it again until later that night when I was standing in our kitchen holding a glass of wine, surrounded by people talking about things I had no foothold in, and I kept coming back to that pause, that quiet, almost imperceptible recalibration. At one point, her colleague asked me something about my work, genuinely curious, and I started to answer, and I saw Ashley's expression shift, just slightly, just for a second, something between impatience and something I didn't have a word for yet. I finished my sentence and moved to refill someone's glass, and that was the end of that. I know how this sounds. I know it sounds like I was searching for something to feel bad about. Maybe I was. But I think when you start to feel like you don't quite fit somewhere, you start cataloging the evidence without realizing it. Around that same time, I noticed she'd stopped asking about my week in any real way. She'd still ask, technically, but there was a quality of waiting for me to finish rather than actually listening. And I started abbreviating things, compressing them, speeding through my own life so we could get to hers, which had more texture and more stakes and more of everything. I accommodated that without deciding to. I just did it, naturally, the way you adjust your posture in a chair that's slightly wrong. You don't think about it. You just slowly contort yourself. One evening, she looked at me across the dinner table and said, not unkindly, "Ryan, don't you ever want more than this?" And I said, "More than what?" And she made this vague gesture, at the apartment, at the air, at me somehow, and said, "I don't know, just more." I said something like, "I'm pretty happy here," which was true, or had been true, though even as I said it, I couldn't be completely sure anymore. She didn't push it. We moved on. But the word sat in the room after that, and I kept brushing up against it for weeks, at dinner, in bed, on the drive to work, like a bruise you keep accidentally pressing. There was one night, maybe a month after that conversation, where I woke up at 2 in the morning and she wasn't in bed. I found her in the kitchen, laptop open, phone in hand, and she looked up and said, "Sorry, couldn't sleep, big presentation tomorrow." And I nodded and went back to bed. But I lay there in the dark thinking that I hadn't known about any presentation, that she hadn't mentioned it, that somewhere along the way we'd stopped being the people who told each other things. I want to be fair to her, because I think she genuinely didn't know what she was feeling either. She was moving fast through a world that was suddenly opening up for her, and maybe she looked back and saw me standing in the same place and felt something she didn't have language for yet. Restlessness, maybe, or something more honest than that, something closer to doubt. I don't think she was trying to make me feel small. I think she was becoming someone, and I wasn't changing at the same pace, and the distance between us was real, even though neither of us was ready to name it. What I only understood later, months after everything ended, was that somewhere in that period I had already started to grieve. Not the marriage exactly, not yet. Just the specific feeling of being in a room with her and knowing, without having to think about it, that I belonged there. Looking back, I think I spent most of that winter waiting for things to go back to normal, as if normal was still somewhere ahead of us rather than something we'd already passed without stopping to mark it. The apartment felt different in a way I couldn't explain to anyone, including myself. Not cold exactly, just managed. Like we'd both learned to move around each other without making contact. Ashley was traveling more by then, sometimes gone for 4 or 5 days at a stretch, and when she came back there was always this brief adjustment period where I could feel her recalibrating, stepping back down into our life like it was something she had to consciously re-enter. I noticed, but I didn't say anything, because by then I'd gotten good at deciding things weren't worth the conversation. One night she came home from a trip, dropped her bag by the door, and started telling me about a dinner she'd had with her team in some city I'd never been to. The restaurant, the wine, the conversation. And I was listening. I was genuinely listening. But at some point I realized she wasn't actually telling me because she wanted to share it. She was telling me the way you tell someone about a movie they'll never see. I made dinner that night, and we sat across from each other, and she said, "You seem quiet." I said, "I'm fine, just tired." She nodded like that was the answer she expected, and we ate in silence for a while. I remember staring at my plate thinking this is what we've become. Two people performing a dinner. There was one evening that winter that I keep coming back to. We'd had a rare night in together, and I suggested we watch something. Anything. Just to share an hour without the weight of all the unspoken things between us. She agreed. But 20 minutes in she picked up her phone and started scrolling, and I sat there watching the screen, no longer watching the show, and I thought about saying something and then didn't, and then thought about it again and still didn't. After it ended she said, "That was nice," and I said, "Yeah," and we went to bed. I stared at the ceiling for a long time that night. That was most of our evenings by then. The actual conversation, the one I'd been half dreading for months without admitting it, happened on a Sunday in early spring. Not during a fight. That's the thing I still find hardest to explain to people. There was no fight. We'd had a quiet morning, coffee, the usual, and then she sat down across from me at the kitchen table with this particular stillness about her, the kind that means someone has been rehearsing, and she said, "I think we need to talk about where things are going." I said, "Okay." She said, "I don't think we want the same things anymore, Ryan. I don't think we have for a while." I asked her what she meant by that, not defensively, genuinely, because I think part of me still needed her to say it out loud. She said, "I feel like I'm moving in one direction and you're not moving at all. And I don't mean that as an insult. I don't know how to keep doing this." I sat with that for a moment. I said, "Is there someone else?" And she said, "No." And I believed her. I still do. There was a long silence, and then I said, "So what are you saying?" And she looked at me in this steady, almost careful way and said, "I think you already know what I'm saying." And the worst part was that she was right. I did know. I'd known for a while. In that quiet place where you put the things you're not ready to look at yet. What I remember most about that moment wasn't the pain. It came later. It was this strange stillness inside me, like my body had already processed the news before my mind caught up. I nodded. She nodded. And that was more or less the end of 4 years. The weeks after that had a strange texture. Not the devastation I expected, but something flatter and more disorienting, like standing in a room after all the furniture's been removed. We were civil about the logistics. More than civil, actually. She was almost gentle about it. Offered to let me stay in the apartment. Didn't fight about the things that could have been fought about. I kept waiting for the moment where I'd fall apart, where it would hit me properly, but it didn't come the way I thought it would. What came instead was this low, persistent ache. Not sharp, not dramatic, just always there, like a sound you can't unhear once you've noticed it. I remember calling my sister Erica about a week after it was settled, and she asked how I was doing, and I said, "Honestly, I don't know. I think I'm okay, and that worries me." She was quiet for a second and then said, "Maybe okay is the right answer. Maybe you've been carrying this longer than you think." I didn't really understand what she meant at the time. I just remember sitting on the kitchen floor after that call. I don't know why the floor. Maybe because it was the one place in the apartment that felt completely neutral, that held no specific memory of us. And thinking that the apartment felt more like mine in that moment than it had in over a year. Which was a strange thing to feel. Which was maybe the first honest thing I'd felt in a long time. The numbness lasted a few weeks, and then it slowly started to lift, not into pain exactly, but into something more like clarity, A gradual, uncomfortable recognition of how much I'd been adjusting, shrinking, editing myself to fit into a space that had been getting smaller without either of us saying so out loud. I started running sometime in the first month after everything ended. Not because I had some plan to reinvent myself, not because I was trying to become a different person, but honestly because I didn't know what to do with my evenings anymore, and the apartment felt too quiet in a way that sitting still made worse. So I ran. Badly at first. 30 minutes felt like punishment, and I'd come back breathing too hard, legs heavy, feeling slightly ridiculous. But I kept going out anyway, mostly because it was the one part of the day where I wasn't thinking about anything in particular, where my brain finally had something physical to focus on instead of circling the same 3 or 4 memories. I didn't tell anyone I was doing it. It didn't feel like something worth mentioning. That was around the time I also started cooking actual meals instead of eating whatever required the least effort, started calling people I'd quietly drifted from during the marriage, friends I'd seen less and less of as Ashley's circle expanded and mine somehow contracted without me noticing. My friend Daniel picked up on the second ring when I called him after almost 8 months of nothing and said, "I was wondering when you'd surface," and I laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks, a real laugh, not the polite kind. We met for a beer that week and talked for 3 hours about nothing important, and it was one of the better evenings I'd had in a long time, which told me something I wasn't quite ready to examine yet. I didn't understand that these small things were adding up to something. I just thought I was passing time. Erica was the one who pointed it out, a couple months in. She came to visit for a weekend, and on the second morning, she looked at me across the breakfast table and said, "You seem different." I said, "Different how?" And she said, "Lighter. You seem lighter, Ryan." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and changed the subject, but I thought about it for days afterward. Lighter. I turned that word over and kept arriving at the same uncomfortable question. Lighter than what? Exactly. And how heavy had I been without knowing it? It was around that time that I started to understand, slowly and not all at once, what the last year of the marriage had actually felt like from the inside. Not the version of it I'd been telling myself. The reasonable version, the fair version, the one where I gave Ashley every benefit of the doubt and turned most of the blame inward, but the actual texture of it. The way I'd stopped mentioning things that mattered to me because I'd learned they wouldn't land. The way I'd gotten smaller in conversations, more careful, more edited. The way I used to lie awake sometimes doing this quiet mental accounting of whether I was enough, whether I was keeping pace, whether I was disappointing her in ways she wasn't saying out loud. I hadn't named any of that while it was happening. I just carried it. The way you carry a bag that gets heavier so gradually you don't notice the weight until you finally put it down. About 8 or 9 months after the divorce, I met Qley. We worked in adjacent departments, kept crossing paths at the kind of unremarkable moments that don't feel like anything at the time. A shared elevator, a coffee machine, a hallway conversation that ran longer than expected. We started talking properly over the following weeks, then more, then a lot. I wasn't looking for anything, and I don't think she was either, which is maybe why it felt so uncomplicated from the start. What I remember most about those early months with her was how easy it felt to just say things, ordinary things, small things, without first running them through some internal filter to check if they were the right things. I told her once, maybe 4 months in, that I'd spent a long time feeling like I was behind on something without knowing what it was, and she just looked at me and said, "That sounds exhausting." 2 words. No advice, no reframing, no pivot to a solution. Just that. I didn't realize how much I'd needed someone to just say that until she did. I didn't realize how much energy I'd been spending on that filter until I stopped needing it. I heard through people we both knew that Ashley had moved fully into her new life. New apartment, new routines, the kind of clean slate reset that suits someone who's good at forward momentum. I wasn't keeping track, but information finds you whether you're looking for it or not. I also heard, eventually, that she'd been asking about me. Nothing dramatic, just quiet inquiries through mutual people, the kind that are easy to dismiss as casual curiosity, but probably aren't. I didn't do anything with that information. I didn't feel triumphant about it, and I didn't feel nothing either. It was something in between, something more complicated, a kind of sadness that had nothing to do with wanting her back. I found out later, through Erica who'd heard it from someone else, and that way information travels in small circles, that Ashley had seen me and Qley together once, somewhere ordinary, a street corner near a coffee place we went to sometimes. That she'd seen us laughing about something. That Qley had her own key to my apartment by then. I don't know exactly what Ashley felt in that moment, and I won't pretend to. I'm not inside her life, and I don't want to be. What I know is what I felt when I heard about it, which was quieter than I expected. Not satisfaction, not relief, not anything clean like that. Just a kind of finality. The sense of a door that had been left slightly open for a long time finally closing on its own, without anyone having to push it. I don't think Ashley is a bad person. I've never thought that. I think she wanted something I wasn't, or wasn't becoming fast enough, and I think that's a real thing, a legitimate thing. Even if the way it played out left marks I'm still finding. I think I also wasn't as fine with certain things as I kept telling myself I was. I think I did some shrinking I didn't have to do, some disappearing that was my own choice even if it didn't feel like one at the time. There's no version of this story where one of us is simply right. I've made peace with that, mostly. What I have now feels like mine in a way that's hard to explain, not because it's better in every measurable sense, but because I'm actually present in it, actually taking up the space I'm supposed to take up, not editing myself down to fit some idea of what I should be. I don't write this to settle anything or to make a point. I write it because I kept thinking about it, and eventually the only way through that was to put it somewhere outside my own head. If anything, I guess the thing I'd want someone to take from this is not that ambition is dangerous or that relationships can't survive imbalance. I don't believe either of those things. It's more that you can be so busy being reasonable, so committed to being the understanding one, that you don't notice you've stopped being yourself. And by the time you notice, you've been gone for a while.
You know, listening to you, I couldn't help but think that your ability to be so reasonable and understanding is both a gift and a trap. It's truly great that you found the strength to step out of that invisible state and can finally breathe deeply again. Here are a couple of things I thought about while listening. Give yourself permission not to be convenient. You mentioned how you used to edit yourself to meet someone else's expectations. It might be worth practicing the habit of speaking up about your needs right away, even if it feels like a small thing or might bother someone. Protect your lightness. That feeling your sister pointed out, that you seem lighter, is your most valuable compass. If you ever feel yourself starting to shrink or weigh every word again, just remember this time and how much it cost you to find yourself again. Thank you for sharing this. It was incredibly sincere.